From Comox to assist with the rescue. Northern Escape's website says it was founded in 2004 by a group of 4 friends. They're experienced in the heli-skiing industry going back to the 1980s. The tour company says it has contacted a critical incident stress management team to support those affected by the crash. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
It was a hugely challenging day for hundreds of thousands of commuters to get around the Lower Mainland. Transit workers are on strike, halting buses and sea buses across our region. They're going to be shut down until Wednesday morning unless a new collective agreement can be reached. Mira Baines has more on the fight and the fallout.
Commuters were left in the lurch.
I didn't know there was a strike beforehand, so I was just waiting at the bus stop and then noticed that all buses were canceled.
My friend come here, drive me go to work. Oh my God.
Bus supervisors walked off the job, shutting down Metro Vancouver bus routes and sea bus routes, and leaving 300,000 people looking for a way to get around. Rideshare fares spiked.
It's $26, $30 to Vancouver and back. $60. Some people get that in the day.
Marisol Vigiegas relies on sea bus to get to work.
I clean houses and I cannot afford that money. So for me, it's very important to take the ride from my sea bus every day.
Talks between the union and Coast Mountain Bus Company failed to cement a new collective agreement over the weekend.
The big sticking point is wages. We just hope the union will come back as well with realistic expectations about what a new contract might look like.
The union wants wage parity with other transit employees.
Coast Mountain Bus seem more interested in assigning blame and to smearing our members than to getting a deal.
The province says it wants negotiations to resume.
We do have some tools available to us if both parties agree. As I mentioned, appointing a special mediator, and that is a consideration.
The union says this is a 48-hour job action, meaning it will end early Wednesday. But before that, it could spread. The union has filed a complaint with the Labor Relations Board, arguing it should be allowed to picket outside rapid transit stations, meaning trains could also be affected. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, as for alternatives, Uber says it will cap surge pricing during the strike and is trying to entice more drivers onto the roads. The head of Yellow Cab, meanwhile, says it's moving drivers from YVR to other parts of the city. And as Michelle Soup shows us, other people are getting behind the wheel to help strangers.
With most transit service at a standstill because of the strike by Coast Mountain Bus Company employees, we heard a lot of frustration from people who depend on those services. But we also wanted to hear from the Good Samaritans.
Let's do this.
The people who stepped in and said, let's help people get around.
I'll throw this guy on for some GPS. I heard about the strike happening last night, and I had seen another post in another Facebook group with someone offering rides. And I hadn't seen anything similar in Kits, so I figured, you know what, I'm off work for 3 days. May as well just do something nice for some strangers. And then I got a couple asking for rides, so I did a ride to the hospital this morning. I brought a friend to go register her kid for a kindergarten. I've got one for 6:30 tomorrow morning, which I'm not super stoked for. My life's motto is do good recklessly. So, I mean, getting up early isn't going to hurt me, and it's going to make a difference for someone, so why not? You know, I'm not doing this for a profit. I'm not even asking people for gas money. I'm like, if you can offer a couple dollars, great, but I'm not expecting it. I'm not asking for it. I got a coffee this morning, which was nice. We want to help each other out as best we can and build that good sense of community. Because I find that's one thing that's really missing in Vancouver as a whole. Having moved here 2.5 years ago, it's really hard to make friends here. It's hard to make genuine connections. And the best way to do that is to just meet new people doing random things. All right, bye. All right, let's do this. I'm just trying to spread goodness and hopefully people pay it forward eventually, you know?
What did you say, do good recklessly?
Yeah, that's my life motto, just do good recklessly. If it's not gonna hurt me, it's not gonna put me out more than I can afford to be put out, I'll just do it.
The federal government is slashing the number of visas it grants to international students by 1/3. It's meant to curb the influx of temporary residents, which it says has put a strain on Canada's housing market. As John Hernandez explains, there are big concerns for students and schools here in BC.
Before, I thought that Canada was a very welcoming country.
Ottawa's pledge to reduce international student permits rippling through BC campuses Monday.
It's a sad opportunity. Hopefully other countries open doors.
For the last decade, the province has been a marquee destination for international students, currently hosting about 200,000 of them. But the province admits the number of predatory schools has gotten out of hand.
That are making all of these, I think, egregious promises about, you'll get this kind of housing and you'll have in-class instruction. The student does all the right things and they arrive and there is no housing, there are no supports.
BC will determine which schools will get international student permits. The post-secondary education minister says there will be improved oversight.
So we're going to be requiring much more accountability by these private institutions.
Recent arrivals split on the messaging it could send to prospective students from overseas.
In a way, glad that it's happening because there has been a lot of cases where colleges have been fraudulent towards students.
I think they'll probably think about it twice before investing that much time and it also money because you have to pay for just applying.
Some experts fear quality schools and universities could also suffer significant financial hits.
So this reliance on international students isn't, partly it's because universities need to stay afloat and need the revenue. So I could see this having some really negative ramifications on universities that have been good actors so far.
And Ottawa's assertion the move will help alleviate housing pressure also under scrutiny.
I have not seen a tremendous amount of evidence that international students are really to blame for any aspect of the housing crisis. To be honest with you, most of them are very precariously housed.
BC will learn just how many permits it can issue this year in the months ahead and plans to unveil more international student measures next week. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
One man is dead after an early morning fire in Surrey. Around 3:30 a.m., firefighters responded to a blaze in a home above a business on 71A Avenue in Newton. When they arrived, crews found a 54-year-old man on the floor of the suite. They tried to save him, but he died. 2 pets were also killed. Officials say the fire is not suspicious. Today marked the start of a coroner's inquest into a massive fire that killed 2 people at a Gastown SRO nearly 2 years ago. The Winters Hotel blaze also displaced more than 70 people on the downtown east side. The inquest into the deaths of Marianne Garlow and Dennis Gay began with family members describing their loss. Former hotel residents described the rooming house as having chains on the door and fire sprinklers that didn't work. One survivor, whose cat was killed, says she hopes the inquest brings justice and closure.
It brings up a lot of bad feelings, a lot of sad feelings. I miss Mary a lot. I miss Dennis. I miss my cat. It's basically screwed my whole life up.
Fire officials believe the blaze was sparked by unattended candles. The SRO was run by Atira Property Management. It says it welcomes any of the jury's findings that will lead to higher safety and security in the supportive housing sector. Almost 30 witnesses are set to testify at the 2-week inquest. It's not meant to find fault, but can lead to recommendations to prevent similar tragedies. In Colona, a tiny home village designed to get people off the streets is starting to take shape. It's one of 2 projects the city has begun alongside BC Housing. But as Brady Strachan reports, some people sleeping outdoors in tents say they have not been offered a space yet.
Work is finally getting underway here at Cologna's first tiny home village in the city's north end. Now, all day long trucks with tiny modular homes on them have been pulling up, and then forklifts have been taking them off and putting them into place on this site here. Each of these homes is about 6 square meters in size. That's about as big as a small garden shed. Now, these units are prefabricated by a company in Washington State and then trucked up here to this city-owned lot. While these units are still considered temporary housing, each home will have a heater, a bed, a desk, shelving, and lighting, according to BC Housing. Today, crews are removing snow from the site and delivering the homes. Later this week, each unit will be installed and hooked up to electricity. A non-profit organization will run the 60-home site and provide meals, skills training, and help for residents here navigating the housing system. This project comes as Colona, like many communities, is experiencing a severe housing crisis. Just across the street from this lot, approximately 200 people are staying in this encampment, sleeping in tents this month as temperatures dropped well into the -20s. The encampment has doubled in size since this time last year, and people staying here tell CBC News they're frustrated they were not offered spots in the tiny home village. Instead, those staying in homeless shelters are being moved into the tiny homes. BC Housing confirms this and says the measure will free up more space in the shelters and allow for more people to get off the streets. This is the first of 2 tiny home projects in Colona, a second site along Highway 97, where another 60 modular homes are yet to be put in place, is expected to open later this year. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Colona.
There are still many questions about that unusual odor that began in Burnaby yesterday. Parkland Refinery says the burnt chemical smell was linked to an issue with a processing unit. Particulate matter drifted as far west as Bowen Island and as far east as Golden Ears Park. Parkland told CBC News no other information is available today. Around 100 complaints were filed with Metro Vancouver, which regulates air quality in our region. Many people argue the information from officials about the smell came far too late in the day. Burnaby's mayor, though, has some advice if it happens again.
Get in touch with our fire department because they're on top of it and they start monitoring right away. And we got out some communications as quickly as we could once we could confirm. But if you're seeing the fire department not walking around with masks on or protecting themselves, that's usually a sign that everything is okay.
Metro Vancouver says it is still monitoring air quality, looking into what happened. It did say late today that while sulfur dioxide levels did rise, air contaminant objectives were not exceeded. Renowned Canadian filmmaker Norman Jewison has died at the age of 97. His publicist says the 3-time Oscar nominee died peacefully at home on the weekend.
Okay, you're excited, and action!
Jewison's movies have won numerous Academy Awards, and in 1999 he received an Oscar for Lifetime Achievement. His racial drama In the Heat of the Night won Best Picture for 1967. He also directed Moonstruck, Fiddler on the Roof, and The Hurricane, among other films. He also founded the Canadian Centre for Advanced Film Studies in his hometown of Toronto. After the break, the father of a boy killed by his mother and stepfather is applauding the Premier's push for answers. That story is next. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. In the Kootenays, a woman who advocated for drug users has now been killed by BC's toxic drug supply. Christa Smith was one of 58 people in Cranbrook whose lives were cut short since the province declared a public health emergency in 2016. As Corey Bullock shows us, loved ones say more needs to be done now to save lives. And a warning, some people may find details in this story upsetting.
She was a kind soul. She would help anybody that came her way in any way she could.
Jim and Alice Smith remember their daughter, Christa. She died in November. Her father says she was another victim of the toxic drug crisis. Her death was the kind of loss she worked tirelessly to prevent.
She had a wonderful childhood, I think.
After a few years on Vancouver Island, Christa's family moved to Kimberley when she was in grade 7. A car crash when she was a teenager changed her life. To manage her pain, she started taking prescribed painkillers and was never able to stop.
And this is why she ended up 20 years later with a full-blown addiction to opiates.
Jim and Alice say they were always there for their daughter. They helped her secure an apartment so she had a warm place of her own to go home to. In November, they took a trip and returned to a horrifying discovery.
I let myself in after yelling through the door, and no answer, and I discovered her myself on the floor. And that's, the coroner had said she had been passed for a few days at that time.
Jim says Christa died from a lethal combination of fentanyl and methamphetamines. The coroner has not yet confirmed a cause of death. In the community, she's remembered for helping others like her.
Christa was a martyr. All right, Christa had done a ton of really good things for us, and Christa also came from really good stock, really good people.
Christa helped launch a peer network to help people who use drugs. People like Jessica Lamb.
There were 6 of us that this group started with. I think the thing that makes me the most sad right now about all of this is of the 6 of us that started this group, there's only 3 of us that are left.
For people who loved her, Christa's death is all too symbolic. She was trying to alleviate her own and others' suffering from toxic drugs and likely died from that poisoned supply.
We may not be able to resolve it right now, but we don't have an effective response for it. And especially in the East Kootenays, we're a small enough community, we should be able to have a response that has some effect.
For Jim and Alice, Christa's death created a reality they never wanted.
It's not, children are not supposed to die before their parents.
Christa was 42. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
The father of a 6-year-old Indigenous boy who was killed in 2018 is applauding Premier David Eby's promise to get answers about his son's tragic case. A warning for you, details in this story are distressing. Dante Lucas was taken into care after he was born. Years later, the Nuchalnuth Welfare Agency, USMA, returned him to a home with his birth mother and stepfather. 4 months later, Dante was dead, his parents charged with killing him. In spite of many questions, there's been no inquiry, and the Premier is now asking why. He's far from the only one. Here's our Wamish Hamilton with his perspective on the need for answers.
Dante Lucas would have been 12 years old now, on the cusp of being a young man. As a child of Nuchalnuth ancestry, he would have also participated in his first potlatch by now. But being a teen, an adult, having kids of his own, these will never come to be. Dante was killed in 2018. He was 6 years old. His birth mother and stepfather pleaded guilty to manslaughter. There was no trial, but details from court documents, the nature of wounds on his young body, are horrific. They will be sentenced in May in Port Alberni Provincial Court. That will end the criminal proceedings, but there are still so many questions left unanswered. Despite these guilty pleas, no agency and no government ministry or minister has been held accountable in Dante's death. We have to ask, who is responsible? He was in the care of USMA, the Nuchalnuth Child Welfare Agency. USMA enforces provincial legislation as a delegate for the Ministry of Children and Family Development. The provincial representative for Children and Youth decided in December to not yet investigate Dante's death. She said, the potential further harm and trauma to the families and communities was among the reasons she wouldn't investigate. A 6-year-old child died. What greater harm could there be? Why isn't USMA held to the same standard of scrutiny and accountability that the province would be if Dante died in ministry care? In 2019, USMA released an audit looking at records from 2014 to 2018, which was the year Dante died, but they would not investigate his death. Premier David Eby says he plans to get answers. Many will be waiting to hear from him. In all of this, we can't forget Dante. USMA is the Nuchalnuth word that translates to precious one. Precious like he was. Precious to all of us. I'm Wamish Hamilton in Vancouver.
There Weather is alive and rather damp. Look at the Port of Vancouver. We are back to rain here on the south coast as that snow begins to melt here, at least on the ground. Darius Madavi will have your BC-wide weather forecast right after this.
At this Whitehorse Elementary School's cafeteria, happy sounds of kids reconnecting after the holidays. And a few sights you wouldn't have seen in Canadian schools in years. Nuts and peanuts are now allowed for students in grade 3 and up. The initiative says the principal came from the parents. The school invited them for a big meeting.
We basically all agreed that nuts and peanuts were nutritious and they were part of healthy eating habits. So parents were very aware of the research, and they were also very aware of the risks, like the pros and cons of allowing.
The school does have other measures in place. Youngest grades still have food restrictions, and the office is stocked with EpiPens.
For years, banning things like nuts and peanut butter from Canadian schools was considered the gold standard in preventing severe allergic reactions in students. But a major 2021 study led by Canadian researchers found that there just isn't enough good evidence that bans even work.
I don't know if they have what.
Dr. Susan Wasserman was the lead researcher on that study.
What we found is that there wasn't great literature to support the practice.
But the study came with major caveats.
If you are going to eliminate food restriction as just one of the things that may work, that everything else has to be in place. Meaning that the staff and whoever looks after children do have to be aware of who the food allergic children are. Epinephrine auto-injectors need to be on site and preferably carried by the students.
Plus, of course, rigorous hand washing and cleaning of surfaces. But those best practices may not be possible in all schools.
The first module is all about food allergy.
Food Allergy Canada is an organization dedicated to helping Canadians who live with food allergies, a group that includes at least 600,000 school children.
We have to balance, the desire to send in nutritious lunches without any restrictions to the safety of these children.
This expert says schools are advised to have many policies in place, not just bans, but that those recommendations have to contend with reality. Some schools are so strapped for staff that older kids supervise younger kids' lunches.
When it comes to removing restrictions or removing bans, I think that a lot of schools will be very hesitant to consider that because, it does have a lot of implications.
Simon, now 9, almost died when he was 18 months old. His throat started closing after he had a single cashew.
It completely changed kind of the trajectory I thought I was on as a parent.
Sending Simon to school leaves his parents racked with anxiety, something they say would be even worse if more schools were to scrap food bans.
Why reverse it? What if the argument is that it is giving people a false sense of security? I want to assure everybody that as a parent of a child who can die from ingesting something, I never have a sense of security, ever, never.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
So I know when I really like a song, if within the first 3 seconds, I'm already vibing to it.
Hey, I'm Rohith Joseph. Vibin' is the new show all about discovering great new songs and fresh artists from across BC and beyond.
It's not one person dictating what good music is, it's the community sharing what good music is.
Stream Vibin' on CBC Listen.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace. To cool and clean the air in your home, call Direct Buy Furnace. Installing Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
Time for our BC-wide weather forecast. with Darius Madabi. Before we get to the forecast, can you explain the stink event? Lots of questions still to be answered.
Yes, gladly. And I can't tell you what exactly caused the stink, but I can tell you why it stuck around, why it spread to so much of Metro Vancouver. So if you take a look, you can see this is what we usually have in terms of the atmosphere. Warmest air at the bottom at surface level, and then we get colder as we rise up and the atmosphere gets thinner. This is what we'd normally have. And in this case, if we have air pollution or smog or whatever it is, that air will just rise up because it's warmer, and so it'll rise up into the colder parts of the atmosphere. But what we had over the weekend was something a little bit different, a little bit unusual. We had a temperature inversion. And so what happens here, this is a graph of the elevation that you're at and what temperature it is in that layer of the atmosphere. And you can see that at sea level, it was actually colder than it was just a little bit higher. So if you were at the top of the local mountains here in Vancouver, you might be a little bit warmer than we actually were down at sea level. What that means is that we had a different sort of orientation of the atmosphere. You can see we had warmer air up higher and then colder air below. So even though we had this air pollution that was trying to get up, it was sort of the warmer part of this cool layer, it was not warmer than the warmer air above. And so it sort of gets trapped. It can't rise because this is warmer, and it can't go down because it was cooler. So this acts as a lid and just causes that air pollution to stick around and then spread out across the area. So that's why we had that snake not just linger, but also spread across much of Metro Vancouver. But if we move on to our actual weather, you can see temperatures are warming up across BC, even at sea level. You can see we're actually warmer than usual now, despite that cold snap that we had just last week, 2 weeks ago. And we have lots of weather coming our way. Plenty of systems rolling in this week, mostly as rain for the south coast, not so much snow. At higher elevations, still a little bit. Whistler likely to get a mix of rain and snow over the next couple days, but lots of rain at sea level. And even though this looks like it's a very consistent rainfall, it will come in waves. These are more scattered showers. This model is more broader, so it's showing you where we might get some trace rain as well. But in terms of accumulation, plenty of snow, particularly north of Williams Lake and really anywhere north of central BC. But here in the south coast and in places like Colona, it's looking like mostly rain. So here I've swapped that those numbers that were showing snowfall to rainfall. You can see plenty of accumulation over the next few days. You can see that in our conditions map as well. Plenty of activity, but a lot of this is just scattered showers that won't come up throughout much of the southern BC and up to those flurries up in central BC as well. But over the next 5 days here in Vancouver, you can expect plenty more rain to come. A little bit of sunshine tomorrow afternoon, which would be a little bit nice of a break, because for the rest of the week, lots of rain to come, Dan.
Captain Consistency. Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And that is your late news for Monday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news anytime, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. That starts tomorrow morning at 5:30. Good night.